So thanks a lot. It's a real pleasure to be here. This is joint, I guess I should read the title. It's called Evidence and Theory with respect to the intersection of neuroscience and sociology. And it's work that's joint with Noam Zerubbabel, who's one of the scholars here. And for me, it's interestingly quite different than most of my work because it arose quite purposefully in the sense that Noam and I talked about how to integrate sociology with cognitive neuroscience and came about at some point to specifically design a project that made it impossible to do that. And that's what we'll talk about today. So the talk addresses the neural foundations of social relations, or alternatively, and I think you'll see why later, the social foundations of neural relations. Particularly, I'm going to address why we like each other, why people gravitate towards different group members, and ask whether brain imaging can help us understand not only liking in the present, but what the object of this paper is going to be, which is liking in the future. And then more specifically, we'll talk about the emergence of reciprocity. The big picture for me, though, I need to say, is that I've always wanted to give a talk which has cute chimpanzees on it. And the thing is, in my discipline, it's really frowned on to have pictures of chimpanzees because that invokes all sorts of negative sentiment arising from the general idea that, studying monkeys in order to make inference to people is reductive, which in my discipline is bad. So I'm not interested in chimpanzees per se, but I am interested in some of the characteristic features of social groups, of which the most important is the fact that all groups, all human groups anyway, evolve. As they evolve, dyadic reciprocity appears, and that dyadic reciprocity structures the patterns of social relations, and it typically induces a structure of what we call balanced opposition in some 2 or 3 or more subgroups that are characterized by positive ties within the group and negative ties across the group. And the building block of that kind of social structure, which is the fundamental social structure of human groups, is reciprocity, and the basic unit of reciprocity is the dyad or the triad. So the prior for this talk is that the human brain must have evolved to do something, and what we think it evolved to do is to navigate relations, social relations, because humans, like other social animals, are embedded within complex social networks. And so if one thinks that, then one could look at the social science applications of neuroscience, and what's striking is that whenever you encounter them, they appear by design to completely ignore social structure, when it seems obvious a priori that the human brain has to have evolved precisely to deal with social structure, that is, to navigate social relations. The standard social cognitive neuroscience approach is, in a sense, completely asocial. And so if we leave monkeys aside, which we did from an evolutionary perspective, I'm going to essentially try to describe how we look at that design. It's asocial by design. The studies are purification machines where everything remotely social is taken out in order to not contaminate the results, which for the sociologists in this group is, by analogy to my discipline, as absurd a research design as the Standard Social Survey, which tried to make inference to people by abstracting them from social context. Now, the funny thing about this slide is that Noam provided the images. I provided the title. He would never write something. I didn't click this slide. Sorry. Wow. This is the title. Sorry. I provided the title. Noam provided the images. And for the longest time, when I gave this talk, actually until just a few weeks ago, when I heard Noam give it, I deleted the entire right side because I didn't understand it at all. So when I heard Noam explain that it illustrates scientists manipulating status on a dimension, like we're supposed to see that 3 stars is higher ranked than 1 star, or even more amusing to me, something about the faces in the bottom panel, which look completely similar. And here I have to confess that I failed the theory of mind test online, and it's been very depressing ever since. But those faces are supposed to actually be indicators of different levels of status. But of course, real people, real status, like in a popularity hierarchy, which is about the uneven distribution of real things that happen to people, like attention. And you might remember your days in middle school for an example that comes close to you in terms of the attention hierarchy, is not abstracted from social context. Real status, real people arise from social context. So if we're going to study something like status or reciprocity, we have to pollute our observations. And we have to pollute them by embedding individuals into real contexts or something that's similar to them. So that's the central idea. And our idea is to socialize cognitive neuroscience. We know we navigate and build social structure. That's a human project, but we don't know how we do it. And so the study that I'm going to describe is built around what we think is a radical rethinking of the standard strategy for person perception research in cognitive social neuroscience. Essentially, we're going to try to socialize the paradigm, and the basic strategy we follow involves integrating detailed social network data arising from real interacting social groups with neural imaging techniques. In our study design, the stimuli are not abstractions, they're real people from one's actual social groups. More specifically, all of the participants in our studies are members of a pre-existing or newly formed social network, and in the scanner, they view photographs of their social network members. Since each network member is represented in the study as both a participant, as a perceiver of others, and a stimulus, or a target of social perception, the design enables analyses at the level of the perceiver, what do people see, what happens when people see targets, at the level of the target, and most importantly for us, perceiver by target interactions that are unique to each interpersonal relationship. The study involves linking detailed social network data to fMRI data, and what we're going to do today is measure group members' relative positions and interpersonal ties within a network structure and analyze participants' differential patterns of activity as a function of these individual and relational social network variables. So the population, we've done this a number of times, but the population I'll talk about today is a group of students that we recruited in the summer of 2014 called the Summer of Respect students. 2014 was the 50th anniversary of Freedom Summer, when elite white students went down to the South to enroll blacks in the polls. And we recruited a group of college elite students and sent them down to various locations in the South and elsewhere to organize Walmart workers. So this is the structure of the Summer for Respect network at time one. They had just arrived on campus. They'd introduced themselves. They made speeches describing why they were interested in social action work, and they filled out sociometric data about who they liked in the program. So these are people who are previously largely unknown to each other, and what they're doing is capturing, after a day of interaction with each other, who they liked. As is common in social network data, the size of the circle represents their individual's popularity, their in degree, how many people nominated them as someone they liked, and the arrows are directed, although you can't see that, indicating liking from one person to another. So that's the program. They were sent down to the South, and on their return, 9 weeks later, we put them back in the scanner. We collected social network data subsequently, actually months later. And what I'm going to do today is show how we can think about the neural response at time one, 2 days into the program when they're just meeting each other, predicts their liking subsequently many months later. So what we do is we study regions of interest, in this case the valuation and the social cognition region, and there's a lot of neuroscience about what those regions are up to with respect to person perception and the kinds of mental activity that we're interested in, which is reading and acting within social structure. We completely piggyback on all that work and focus on these two regions alone. I'm going to skip the theoretical justifications for these regions. They matter to Noam, but they don't really matter to me. In general, I think that most of what people think these brain regions are up to is probably not right. Take the reward region. People get activated when they see a $20 bill, and neuroeconomists and others go, oh, that must be the reward region. What our work shows is that people are activated in that region when they see people who are of higher status or who they do not now like, but are going to come to like. And so in my mind, that region is the social navigation action region. And it really doesn't matter what we call it from my point of view. So now I'm going to turn to the problem that we're going to attack today, which is, can we predict which group members will ultimately like one another? Remember, the design is we scan individuals at T1, we collect network data at the same time. We have an implicit measure of attention to others, or liking, which is activation in the reward region. We have explicit liking scores that they give to other people. And what we're going to be interested in is, can we predict network formation months later from the neural response months earlier? First of all, so you know there's a dependent variable. In this group and in all human groups, liking changes dramatically from time 1 to time 2. Some people go down, some people go up, others stay the same. In this side, you see ego from alter and also alter from ego. And what you can see is that there's just a lot of movement. And what we're going to explain is the movement in that liking. So that's the dependent variable. And here's the first result, which is that T1 neural evaluation predicts T2 liking, even controlling for explicit T1 liking. Of course, if you say you like someone at time 1, you're a lot more likely to like them at time 2. But here we're controlling for that. Essentially, your brain knows who you're going to like in the future. You might be content with this finding. It's super cool. It seems cool enough. But as it turns out, it wasn't the most interesting thing that we found, although we were quite happy to discover this. The most interesting thing we found is that implicit, that is neural activity at time 1, independently and interdependently predicts how each individual explicitly evaluates the other at time 2. So let's name people Anita and Buddy. So we have Anita Buddy. Anita's time 1 valuation activity while reviewing Buddy predicts, as I've already shown, how much Anita will like Buddy at time 2, 5 months later. But more interestingly, it predicts how much Buddy will like Anita at time 2. The extent of the Anita-Buddy reciprocity in affect at time 2. And so the most interesting thing here is that your partner's time 1 neural response to you predicts your liking of them months later as strongly and in conjunction with your response to them. So that raises, at least in my mind, some deep issues about what precisely the mind is. I used to end all my sociology talks with this slide, just in case people were having a little hard time believing what we were saying. I figured this would give them a way out. But I stopped doing this because I thought, well, this dead salmon finding is actually not all that much stranger, really, than our finding that others' neural activity predicts our liking in the future. And if you can buy that, which I can, then you might just buy the dead salmon thing too. So that problem aside, we think we found a neural signature for an ubiquitous characteristic of human social structure. And that social structure is the emergence of dyadic reciprocity. In that regard, what neuroscience has been able to do for us is to show us something that couldn't ever be seen without it. Along the way, I think that sociology has something to say for the social cognitive neuroscience field as a whole, which is get real. By which I mean design studies that reflect the real worlds that people are in and which their brains need to deal with. The reason to do that is to put yourself into a position where you can discover how real processes, not abstracted processes which have no referent, but tangible processes instead actually work. The critique in that sense is the same as Marx's critique of liberal political economy. Not that this work is as important as Marx's. I'm not saying that. It isn't. But it's in the same spirit. Thanks a lot.